Okay, Monday Night Football, 2 nights ago. The Chicago Bears hosted the Minnesota Vikings in Chicago. I came on the show and I said I expect Chicago to win this football game. They don't have the better roster. That's not why I thought they were going to win this game. I thought J.J. McCarthy, his first real football game in 600-plus days after the injury last year, of course, won the national championship at Michigan, his final season there. I thought he was going to struggle. That was true for the first 3 quarters, which we'll touch on. But I thought Caleb Williams with Ben Johnson would settle down and we would really see him take that next step as far as trying to, fill those shoes of being a former number 1 overall selection. And we didn't see that as the game really progressed. Now, he started out strong. 6 of 6 on the first drive with a passer rating of 102.1. That first drive was pretty flawless for Caleb Williams and for Ben Johnson. So that first drive tells me a couple of things. One, Ben Johnson is not an issue, right? He's going to be just fine as a head coach just because his play calling is so good. Now, are all great play callers great head coaches? No. That is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. So could there perhaps be, culture issues for Chicago as time progresses? Could there be, physicality issues, discipline issues? All these things could still happen if you have an elite play caller as your head coach. So we'll see if Ben Johnson can shift through that. But I think there were some question marks on whether or not, Detroit just had some really nice pieces or if Ben Johnson truly was incredible. I think most people understood that Johnson was incredible, and I think he proved that in the game. Especially that first drive. So when Caleb Williams is on script, right, NFL coaches and play callers, of course, script out, the beginning parts of games. Once they're on script, the Bears are always going to be good in the beginning of the game. But as the game progressed, after that first drive, Williams was 15 of 29 with a 79.5 passer rating. And that means he's only completing about 50% of his throws, which obviously is not good enough. So when they got further off the script, the more Williams struggled, and I think what was so noteworthy about it was the visible frustration that Ben Johnson showed as Caleb Williams was struggling, particularly early in that second half, right? That first drive where they came out of halftime, and it looked like Johnson had some really nice plays caught up with open receivers, and Williams was not able to get the ball to those receivers. And I think that's certainly something that Williams needs to get better at, right? He's got the rocket for an arm. He's a great athlete, but just sometimes he has some layups that he's not able to convert on. And obviously, if you're going to be a competent / good quarterback in the National Football League, you can't miss layups, right? Tom Brady, he didn't miss layups. If a guy was wide open, he hit him. Joe Burrow, he doesn't miss layups, right? Guy's wide open, he hits him. If it's a screen pass, he hits him if they're open, right? And you saw some easy misses there from Caleb Williams, which certainly was noteworthy. But Johnson, look, it's a guy that in the preseason, Tyson Bagent had a passer rating of like 107, right? Now, yeah, it's the preseason, right? Defenses aren't scheming up against the offenses. I understand that. But the fact that Ben Johnson had Tyson Bagent playing at that level shows me that Ben Johnson has the ability to be a good head coach in the National Football League. And also, when he was with Detroit, remember, there was several cycles where people were wanting Ben Johnson to come in from interviews. Maybe he would take those interviews, but he opted for, I believe, 2 years where he had interest as far as being an NFL head coach. He opted to stay in Detroit. Obviously, they were winning a lot of games. He thought they could kind of take that next step and could compete for a world championship. Obviously, that did not end up happening as they kind of collapsed there against a really good young Commanders team in the first round of the playoffs last season. But point being, it's not a Ben Johnson issue. We're one game in, but I'm ready to say that Ben Johnson, he's going to be just fine. But is Caleb Williams going to be just fine? That I have question marks with. If I am a Chicago Bear fan, I am very concerned with where Caleb Williams is at. Some of the stuff as far as, handling things at the line of scrimmage, that doesn't appear to be as clean as it should going into year 2, right? Some of the stuff where, at some points, quarterbacks are just going to have to overcome, right? You can only be on script for so long. At some points late in the game, we're going to have to make some throws. And when McCarthy and the Vikings were making their comeback in the fourth quarter, the Bears offense just kind of went stagnant, right? It wasn't able to do anything. And I think Johnson put him in some easy spots where he could have some easy throws that he wasn't able to execute on. So, I felt like when Chicago had the first overall pick, it was one of those situations where I didn't love Caleb Williams, but it felt like just the raw talent that he had, what he had put on tape throughout his collegiate career, and the ceiling that he has, you had to take him. I was kind of in the boat where it's like, I don't know if it's going to work, but I feel like you kind of have to take him, especially with all the turmoil in Chicago. If they would have taken a different guy and it hadn't worked out and Williams had gone on to be some great quarterback, I mean, the city would have never, lived that down, right? That would have been something that was talked about forever. So they had to go with that pick. Obviously, Jaden Daniels right now in that draft looks like he is the significantly better quarterback as far as Caleb Williams goes. But I feel like they had to make that move. I have questions on whether or not it's going to work, and especially after week 1 against Minnesota, I really have some reservations as far as where Caleb Williams can take this. I feel like the operation, right? Having control at the line of scrimmage, checking into the right plays, that's stuff you're supposed to see as you go from year 1 to year 2, and he still kind of looked a little bit like a deer in the headlights there. I get it. It's a new system with Ben Johnson. It's a very complex system, but, you see Caleb Williams, not to sit here and question his work ethic or what have you, but you see him, out having a good time from time to time. And, when really he needs to be doing everything he can to master the offense. It's got to be frustrating, too, if you're the Bears, because if he can do that and understand, situationally what he needs to do, read defenses a little bit better, understand the play clock, how long he has, if he needs to make a check, he's got enough time to do that, he doesn't have enough time to do that, needs to call a timeout, what have you. All those things are some things that you should be able to figure out after you have played as much football as he has. He played a ton of football in college, right? And then he played, obviously, all of last year, and I think there were still some question marks in that area that were a little bit concerning if you're the Chicago Bears. All right, let's flip it to the other side and J.J. McCarthy and the Minnesota Vikings. Going through that draft of quarterbacks, it was interesting trying to figure out, who was going to have success, who wasn't. And so much in this league is all about fit, right? Obviously, quarterback is the most important piece to an organization in the National Football League. But that next important piece, in my opinion, is the head coach. And then beyond that, I think it's, ownership, the kind of team and the kind of culture that you have around the head coach and, of course, the quarterback. And Minnesota is in a spot where they check off a ton of boxes. They got a really good GM who just signed an extension, right? They have Kevin O'Connell, who, people in NFL circles think that he is that guy, right? Lots of people have called him the tall Sean McVay, right? He, of course, came from that McVay tree, spent a lot of time there, has been with, McVay, and has seemingly just gotten better each year since he's been with Minnesota. Kirk Cousins, really good NFL quarterback. Is he a Super Bowl guy? No. Is he going to have great postseason success? No. He's a really good quarterback. Kevin O'Connell made him look really good there for a while, right? Sam Darnold, a guy that, was a former high pick when he was drafted several years ago, and then kind of had been a guy that was just bouncing around, trying to find a home, what have you. Sam Darnold made himself a lot of money with how he played last year, thanks to Kevin O'Connell. So Kevin O'Connell is an outstanding head coach, so that's why I think McCarthy has a chance here. And that defense is incredible as well. They fly around. They make plays, hyper-aggressive defense there in Minnesota. I think Brian Flores, I touched on this earlier, I think you could sit there and actually make the argument that he is the best defensive coordinator in the National Football League. It's very exotic. What he shows you one thing pre-snap. He switches. He's got guys in crazy spots. He brings pressure. He does a really nice job of keeping the opposing offense off balance, which – to Caleb Williams, back to Caleb Williams real quick, he's not going to have to face anything that complex until he faces Minnesota once again. So don't want to completely be banging on Caleb Williams there. But organizationally, they check a lot of boxes. Great culture. They've got Justin Jefferson, right, who's the second best wide receiver in the National Football League. So there's a lot of pieces around J.J. McCarthy that can help him be successful. I still, even after the fourth quarter comeback, I'm not expecting him to do that. Maybe he'll shut me up, and in a couple of weeks they'll be undefeated, and he'll be playing great football. And that fourth quarter he had, that's how he'll play throughout the entirety of games. I don't think so. But the first 3 quarters, he looked like a guy that hadn't played football in, 600 days, whatever the number is exactly. That certainly is true. He looked like kind of a deer in the headlights, right? He looked overwhelmed. And, what I thought was really interesting, and it kind of speaks to, O'Connell's brilliance, is they would always cut over to the sideline, and he was just so calm. Right, even when that offense was not moving the ball at all and McCarthy looked horrible, O'Connell was very calm. He said after the game that he saw McCarthy at halftime, looked him in the eye, and was like, "You're going to be the reason we win this football game." Said he loved what he got back from McCarthy, and ultimately that's what ended up happening in that game. J.J. McCarthy, the first 3 quarters, was 7 of 12 with a passer rating of 35.4. That is absolutely horrible. And then the fourth quarter, he was 6 of 8 with a passer rating of over 100, 101, with 3 total touchdowns, 2 throwing and 1 rushing. All the touchdowns were impressive. The one over the middle to Justin Jefferson, really was just cut loose by J.J. McCarthy. And I think that you saw him start to throw with a little bit more confidence, right? It looked like he was kind of guiding balls a little bit early, just being hesitant before just cutting it loose. And then something clicked. There was a play when they really started to get things going where he just hit Jefferson there on the sideline, and he was open, but he just ripped it in there. And then you saw, later on that drive, the touchdown pass. Both the touchdown passes were really good. And he does have the ability to get to outside the pocket and, make some moves with his feet. It looks like his teammates have bought into him. If you saw some of the footage from after the game in the locker room, I think his teammates were pretty fired up about what he was doing out there on the football field, how he closed that game for the Minnesota Vikings. So, maybe I'm banging on him too much. He's in a great spot. Appears to have his head screwed on properly and have a good head on his shoulders. But McCarthy, I still have some reservations as far as what he can do in the National Football League. But Minnesota, they're 1-0 and definitely a team that we will continue to monitor and talk about as the season progresses.